Hey folks, I'm Alex Dowd.
And I'm Katie Reif.
On the first episode of Film Club in 2021, we're talking about the recent Hollywood tradition of opening a new year of movies with a shoddy studio horror flick. 10 years after the trend kicked off, have any hidden gems been unearthed in this annual genre dumping ground? We'll take a look at all 9 and tell you which, if any, are worth your January cash and time.
Welcome to Film Club.
Okay, folks, welcome to a new year of Film Club. It is 2021. We were off a bit for the holidays, but we are back with a new year and a new season of Film Club. Katie, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good now that it's 2021 and all the world's problems are solved. I'm feeling great.
Yeah. We are recording this, we should say, the day before the presidential inauguration. I don't know what else to say about that except that I'll
feel better when it's over.
Yes, I hope that by the time you're listening to this, nothing horrible has happened, and we have made that smooth transition of power. What a wild few weeks it's been, I have to say.
Well, everyone was saying goodbye 2020. I throw you in the trash. It's gone forever. People always have a tendency to blame the year for things being bad, and then when the year turns over and things haven't really changed, you're like, oh.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that. Yeah, we could probably devote a whole episode, a very off-brand and not particularly useful episode for listeners. We'd probably devote a whole episode nonetheless to talking about just how insane the times are that we live in, and let's not do that, I guess.
It'd be a lot of like, dude, I know. It'd be a lot of that.
All I'll say is that it is very on brand for this particular president that he has made the last few weeks that he is in office just so distracting, It's been these last 4 years. There have been many moments over these last 4 years where it's been hard to get anything done because you are just glued to, the news ticker or to Twitter or whatever. Right. And these last few weeks, these last couple weeks have been like a super enhanced version of that. I feel like. I don't know.
Absolutely. The man is good at one thing, and that is making everything about himself. It's the only thing he's good at.
I feel like the only thing that I really identify with him with is his love of fast food. I'm with him on that. That humanizes him for me a little bit.
That being said, though, that buffet of fast food, everybody knows that you have to eat McDonald's within 5 minutes of it coming out of the fryer. It's going to be disgusting.
That's very true. It'll congeal, basically, so you got to eat that shit
can you
quick.
Imagine? Yeah. Hours that passed between bringing it from McDonald's, laying it out on the table, having everybody go through. That food was disgusting by the time they got to it.
Yeah, I'm sure that was very gross. Yeah, besides the fact that it's deeply ridiculous that the president of the United States was serving.
Yes.
I mean, probably some of the best chefs in the country are at his disposal when he's serving fast food. Anyway.
Yeah. Humanizing.
Humanizing, exactly. So yes, it is January. It's January 2021. As you're listening to this. And January, as a time of year for the movie industry, is historically thought of as kind of a dumping ground. The annual tradition is that studios will sort of take the projects that they maybe have the least faith in and release them in January. And it's hard to pinpoint exactly when that started. I think it was largely in the 80s when Hollywood sort of decided that January is the place for our write-off projects, more or less.
Right.
And I suspect that has to do with a couple things. I mean, I think part of it is that you're kind of still in Oscar season in January, and a lot of the movies that open towards the end of the year in limited release to get that qualifying run for the Academy Awards are now trickling into larger release. So we've seen some enormous hits that have been released in this way, so that January becomes about, I think the most significant one of the last few years was American Sniper, which came out.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. Yeah.
Yeah. American Sniper came out in December of 2014, but only in like in New York and Los Angeles. And then when it opened wide in January of the following year, it became retroactively the biggest hit of the following year. So a lot of the oxygen is often sucked up with these kind of movies. The Revenant's another one that did huge business in January after opening in a very small number of theaters the year before.
Right.
I think the other thing is that you'll get something like a Star War, that'll open in December, that is still very much doing really good business in January, to the point where the studio films being released that month to compete with it are not really putting up much of a fight.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like when us critics put out our best of the year lists at the end of every year, there's always a few titles that, the general public hasn't seen yet. And that's that January overlap that you were talking about. And this year's actually kind of interesting because I think maybe because the Oscars got pushed back and the eligibility window got pushed back, I feel like we're seeing more of an awards season, best of the year kind of overlap hangover this year than we were. Like Minari it's coming out now. Promising Young Woman is coming out now. Just stuff that I would expect to see pretty prominently in the awards season is still coming out in January. And it seems like more than usual to me. I don't know how you feel about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot, the ones you're talking about are sort of that same phenomenon of movies that did open, that did have a very limited release in December and are now hitting in January. But there are a few that I think are actually genuinely seeing the first light of day in January, like something like Ramin Barani's The White Tiger, which opened, which hits Netflix this Friday actually, but was in a few theaters a week ago, basically. So there are a few projects that normally would have. Another one is there's this film called Supernova coming out with Colin Firth and Stanley Tucci.
Oh, right.
That's not hitting till the end of the month, and that's the type of thing that they definitely would have. If this were a normal year and you basically had to get all of your Oscar qualifying films in by December 31st, we would have seen those films in December or earlier. But now, the Judas and the Black Messiah is coming out in February. We're seeing films that are effectively that again I think we would have seen towards the end of last year. Are January and February are now is now this extended awards calendar.
Yeah,
So,
Judas and the Black Messiah is a really great example. I'm actually really looking forward to that one.
yeah, I'm interested in seeing it too. It's actually going to be at the Sundance Film Festival in another week or so. So in some respects it's a normal January, in other respects it's not. I think we're also seeing a lot less of the studio fare that generally sort of clogs up January, And a big part of that, obviously, is that, there are movie theaters open around the country. A lot of them are not open, and a lot of studios are taking the, in my opinion, smart approach of not opening stuff right now, and just sort of waiting to open it. I mean, we did get a Liam Neeson vehicle, so that felt a little bit like, wow, even in these strange troubled times, we can still expect Liam Neeson to show up in January.
Yeah, Liam Neeson's still gonna get some revenge during the winter months.
Yep.
I actually, the past couple years, just because of the way our winter holidays work, I've actually written, the review of the first horror movie of the year, and I've strangely started looking forward to it. It's a little tradition that kind of caps off the holiday season for me, and I was a little disappointed because this year's was supposed to be a film called The Devil's Light, which, as you pointed out for the show, Dowd, didn't have a poster or a trailer or anything, but was supposedly coming out at the end of last week and just never surfaced.
Yeah. I mean, so you're sort of, that's a good transition into what we're really talking about today, which is, we're generally talking about January as a time for releasing movies. What we're really talking about is this kind of new tradition that started in 2012, which is studios releasing a horror movie as the very first movie of the year, essentially. So the first date on the calendar after New Year's, the first Friday on the calendar. Over the last decade or so, studios have released. It has been a full decade at this point, I think. Well, actually, it'll be a decade next year.
Started in 2012.
Yeah, it started in 2012. Sort of a generally low-budget horror movie designed to to get that post-holiday business, basically. And so all of them have very early release dates, and you're right that it's sort of become an annual tradition. And I covered a few of these myself. It sort of becomes the first for critics. It's like, this is the first horror movie, or this is really the first movie of the year that you're going to be reviewing. Although most of them, I will say, do not screen for critics. Most of them are, you must go to a Thursday night or a Friday morning screening to watch them.
Yes, the ones that I've done. Yeah. Oh, there was a critic screening for one of them, which I'll be interested when we get to that one to see what you think of it, because I think it's one of the better ones.
Interesting. Okay, now I'm curious, because I'm not sure what that is, so I'm curious. So we are going to go through this last decade of generally not screened for critics first horror movies of the year. And we're just going to talk a little bit about them. And for those who are looking to kind of recreate the experience, seeing these less than amazing films, we're kind of going to give you a guide on which of these are really worth. And this is a relative distinction, I must say, but which of these are really worth your time. Most of these, I will say, even the best of these, you can definitely find something better to watch than that, whatever it might be.
Yeah, but that being said, and I feel like you would probably agree with me on this. Like, if someone says, hey, do you want to sit and watch a crappy horror movie? I'll be like, absolutely. Like, if I don't have something better to do, then I'll watch the 5th installment of a franchise that I have not seen the first 4 of. Like, why not? Like, I'll watch any old horror movie, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I are essentially on the same page that if we have to watch a bad movie,
I'd rather watch a horror movie.
Yeah, the genre I would most hope it occupies is horror, to be honest. And maybe that's just loving the genre, good and bad in its own way. I will say that, we do talk about horror a lot on this show, obviously. We did a whole month of it in October, and here we were able to... We were able to wait 3 months before we brought it up again, but here we are. So we do have a special rating system for these films, and this is kind of the rating system that we're going to be using, and each of us will give you our pick in this system, and it is each film we will tell you if it is almost good, barely watchable, or if you should avoid it at all costs.
Right.
So I will I don't want to tease too much where I fall on these, but I will say that I think that at least one of these, maybe more, would qualify as almost good.
Yes, the spirit of generosity will hopefully be, intact today. There's only a couple of these that I actively was angry I watched it.
Yeah. I feel like that the high ceiling, just so you know, going into this one, the high ceiling for these films is, in my opinion, in AV Club parlance, is basically a C+.
Yeah,
I feel like that's
maybe a B- if you're really nice.
Super generous. Yeah. Okay, well, let's start with the first one, the movie that kind of kicked this trend off, and this is the film that's largely credited for making the first weekend of January a go-to horror slot. It was the one that basically told studios that they could release a cheap crass horror movie at the beginning of the year, and there would be people so desperate to escape the cheerfulness of the holidays that they would go in fairly large numbers. And that is The Devil Inside. And this film was released...
Infamous.
Yes.
If you use Letterboxd, there's a lot of really scathing reviews on Letterboxd for this movie.
Yeah, so The Devil Inside is a found footage exorcism film. It was released on January 6, 2012. Its cinema score, and I think we're going to try to provide those throughout. Its cinema score was a big old whopping F. So it got the lowest
elusive
possible.
cinema score F.
Which, by the way, if you're curious about that system, and it's a kind of by this point time-honored system of polling audiences on opening night about new movies, we actually have a whole episode about that in the backlog. We recorded it towards the beginning of the pandemic last year. One of the first episodes we did when Film Club made the transition into a podcast. So we talk all about cinema score and whether or not every movie that's received the scarlet letter of F deserves it. I will say that this is one that I think might deserve it.
Well, this is one, to call back to something we talked about on that episode. A lot of the films that end up getting Cinema Score Fs are because they have divisive or cop-out kind of endings, and this one has a huge cop-out ending. I guess it just skips straight to the most infuriating part of this film. Spoiler alert, I guess, if you want to watch The Devil Inside, although I feel
Don't watch The Devil Inside.
Yeah, I guess, I feel like you're better off just hearing about it secondhand. This film does something at the end of it that, listen, I took undergraduate screenwriting at a state school from a TA, and she would have failed me for doing this. You would fail a high school screenwriting class for pulling this crap. Instead of actually ending the story, this film ends with a title card telling you to go to therossifiles.com to find out how it ends.
Which I'm used to that kind of, I'm used to that move in like an activism documentary or something. That's
yeah, for sure.
Continue the fight for the lives of dolphins at www.savethedolphins.com or something, It's surprising to see it in a horror movie, Well,
it's just like, you have to, I hate writing endings too. I really do.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of times, I struggle with how to end a piece, and I wish I could just do this. Just be like, I don't know, go look it up.
Yeah, I mean,
it's such a cop-out narratively.
It is. I actually feel like it's almost like they looked at the makers of this looked at the success of the Blair Witch Project.
Yes.
And they misunderstood the cause and effect relationship with the website with that. I mean, because the Blair Witch Project rather famously had a very successful viral campaign leading up to its release, where people were encouraged to go to this website and to look for clues, and it was all used as a really unique and at time rather revolutionary way to sell the movie online to people who were to very online users in 1999.
Right.
I feel like the makers of The Devil Inside looked at that and go, wait, okay, so do we send them to the website after the movie? It's like,
yes, no. Yeah. I fully
Guys,
agree.
you got to do it
When
beforehand.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that was my thought too. I sat there and I saw the title card and I went, oh, so you guys took the complete wrong lesson from the Blair Witch Project.
Yeah. The ending it inspired like almost a campaign of online complaints about this film. There were like mass calls for refunds. People despise this thing. I remember seeing it opening night because I actually went, and I will say this was 2012, and this was right before studios started pushing back the time in which you could go to an advanced screening. Like nowadays, advanced screenings will start as early as, sometimes depending on the size of the movie, as early as 4 p.m. or something on Thursday. This was during the era when if you wanted to see something Thursday before it opened on Friday, your ass was going at midnight. Right. So I was at a midnight screening of this.
Oh, wow.
And the audience, which was mostly teenagers, fairly decent sized audience though for midnight on a Thursday. The audience was revolting at the end of this film. They were just
sure.
like booing.
They had to have been like ripping out the seats in the theater and like throwing popcorn at the screen.
I mean, but this thing made a decent amount of money. It made $100 million worldwide, and about half that domestically here in the States, and it did it on a $1 million budget, so it was hugely profitable.
Right.
And the lesson, honestly, that studios were able to take from this film, I think, is your movie does not have to be good. It just has to look enticing enough to get people back into the theater. And if it's cheap enough, it doesn't matter if there's a huge fall off, because this thing had an almost historic drop off in week 2. But it didn't matter. It already done it. It had already gotten in and out and made its money. It didn't matter that it was that people hated it and that it wasn't going to make any more, because it had already enticed enough people to go that first weekend.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that that's like a time-honored exploitation practice. That's like the practice of selling a film with the poster. Making a poster that has a bunch of cool-looking stuff in it that isn't actually in the movie, because it doesn't matter if they like the movie or not. They already bought the ticket.
Right. Exactly. I don't want to spend too much time talking about the plot of this film because it doesn't matter. It's a found footage exorcism film. My big beef with it, looking back, I actually had to go back and look at the review that I wrote of it, because I sure as hell wasn't revisiting this one. Sorry, folks. I had to go back and look at the review I wrote, 8 or 9 years ago or whatever. And I think that my big issue with this film is that it's the type of found footage movie where it makes no sense that they would constantly be running the camera and that they would be allowed places to run the camera. The funniest scene in the movie. The funniest scene, this is something I do remember about it, is our main character who, her mother is in a mental institution and she wants to know if her mother is insane or if she really was possessed by the devil or whatever. Our main character is at the Vatican. And she just walks into a Vatican exorcism class. And it's like she's just like auditing the class. It's like in a college movie where somebody will just walk in and sit in the back of the classroom. But it's an exorcism class.
Yeah, they have a whole exorcism school at the Vatican in this movie. And I will say, okay, so I had not seen this movie before. I had avoided it because I had heard bad things about it. And before I get into this real quick, can I just say now in January 2021, when you go to the RossiFiles.com, you get one of those notifications. It's like, are you sure you want to go to this website? It might not be safe.
Oh, really?
Yeah, no, the RossiFiles.com is not there anymore. Yeah, you get one of those like, are you sure you want to click on this warnings?
That's hilarious.
Anyway, I had not seen this one before. I had avoided it, but I had seen posters. I actually thought I had seen it before, but I had seen a different found footage.
I miss that kind of movie.
Exorcism horror movie. Yeah. And so I started watching it, and the first half an hour or so, I was like, I don't know, this isn't that bad. It's kind of generic, but I kind of like the little superhero priest thing. Kind of struck me as proto-Conjuring, because James Wan famously kind of has that kind of like team of investigators in his horror movies. Yeah. And I was like, I don't know, this isn't, like, it's generic. And there's a pretty decent exorcism scene in the first half where they hire a contortionist to play the possessed girl. And so she does some kind of cool stuff with her shoulders and her hips. And I was like, I don't know, this isn't that bad. And then in the second half, oh my God, this film takes such a turn. Like, it goes from being to just complete garbage in the second half. And all I can assume is that the writer of this film didn't know what to do, didn't know how to end the story, and so they just kind of let it fall apart and then stuck the title card at the end. Like, it completely falls apart in the second half. There's one scene in it, like, congratulations to this film's producers for convincing an investor or an executive somewhere that they had to actually go to Rome to shoot footage for this film. Congratulations, you got a trip to Rome. But they really don't use the setting very well, and they just kind of abandon the fact that they're in Rome in the second half. Like, it's supposed to be a scene where one of the priests is baptizing a baby, and I guess we're still in Italy, but the whole thing's in English. And they just really abandon all pretense of making any kind of film in the second half. So, yeah, I would avoid this one too.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that I just think that this one breaks the cardinal rules of found footage. I might be a little bit too hung up on movies following these kind of rules, but because ultimately it's just a device. But you watch this thing and think, why at any point was this thing a found footage horror movie, other than the fact that it could be cheaper that way? Because it makes no sense the amount of access these characters get with their camera. It's the type of movie where you're constantly being like, wait, they're allowed to walk around like an insane asylum, for like an asylum for the criminally insane with a camera running. They're allowed to have a camera running in the Vatican behind closed doors in exorcism classes. They're allowed without permission to show up and film an exorcism. It makes no sense. And I don't know why that kind of thing bothers me, but it does. I just feel like if you're going to make audiences watch a found footage movie, at least go the tiny bit, the tiny extra step to make it somewhat plausible.
Yeah, at the beginning they say, well, why do you want to make this documentary? And, kind of frame it as they're making a documentary, which is, one of the old saws of found footage horror. Yeah. And so, like, I guess that justifies why they need to have the camera in all these places, because it's important for their documentary. But I agree that, like,
why could they, though? Why could they? Why could they go to some of these places? I should not be so hung up on this, but like, I guarantee if you show up to a Vatican exorcism class, which apparently are real, I don't know. I mean, apparently that
the Vatican... they have exorcists at the Vatican. It's part of their whole deal, and that's way too much to get into here, but I think that was post the movie The Exorcist that they started doing exorcisms again at the Vatican.
Got it.
So, fun fact.
Anyway, this thing is 83 minutes, so it is the shortest of the films we're talking about today. So if you really want something that's really short, then this would fill that role for you. Otherwise, I'm going to have to give this one the lowest rating, which is avoid at all costs.
Yeah, I'll give the first half barely watchable, but the second half is avoid at all costs. Like I have rarely seen a film that went downhill the way that this film went downhill. It's almost impressive that it got made. The script is so bad.
Okay, so moving on. 1 year later, on January 4th, 2013, Texas Chainsaw 3D was released. Now, you, Katie, you recently wrote a piece about all the Texas Chainsaw movies.
Yes, I wrote a very long piece about
a little
Texas
format
Chainsaw movie.
bending, I must say, because you included the remakes, which are not in the same continuity, but I'll allow it.
Well, okay.
This one kind of bends the continuity of the series as well.
Yeah.
It was sort of proposed as it sort of presents itself as a direct sequel. And the idea behind a direct sequel is that it's a later entry in a series that decides that, all those entries you've been watching diligently all those years, the 2s, the 3s, the 4s, the 5s, we're tossing all of those out. This one is the first true sequel. And it's the one that basically says there's the original and then there's this. And you can it basically retcons everything in between. So
right. But Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the reason I included the remakes is because, like, there is no real continuity to the series really at all. Like, pretty much every sequel, they, refresh the mythology anew for every single Texas Chainsaw movie. So, it kind of doesn't matter. And that to me sort of is what's so ridiculous about Texas Chainsaw 3D, because it's a very fan service type of movie where there's lots and lots of little nods to the original film. And, it's just slavishly devoted to this mythology that even the creator of the franchise, Tobe Hooper, and Kim Henkel, the writer, basically stated with their sequels doesn't matter at all. Like, it's lavishly devoted to something that even the people that made it would tell you you're an idiot for being slavishly devoted to.
Yeah, I mean, even Hooper, the first Texas Chainsaw sequel, part 2, is almost a joke at the expense of the first one.
Absolutely.
So Hooper wasn't even the minute that this thing had sequels, the very first Texas Chainsaw sequel kind of thumbs its nose at the franchise,
Yeah, they posed the Sawyers like the Breakfast Club on the poster. Like, the whole thing is a massive joke. And but this one is, it's sort of like, I actually am having trouble thinking of like a late slasher sequel that is as hung up on the fan service details as this one is to the first Texas Chainsaw movie. Which one?
David Gordon Green's Halloween.
Yes, it's very much like that. Yeah.
Because that's also a direct sequel. Right. The idea is that's very much a 21st century thing, and very much, I would say, even a last few years thing. I think that you can take something like Texas Chainsaw 3D and put it in the same lineage as Jurassic World, as The Force Awakens even. There are sequels that exist to remind people what they liked about the original, not to necessarily meaningfully move things forward. I honestly feel almost the same way about Texas Chainsaw 3D as I feel about Green's Halloween, which is that for all this thing does to say that those other movies didn't count, it's really not that different than the kind of crappy sequels that otherwise existed. Why go through the trouble of wiping the slate clean and then make a movie that really has some of the same problems as all the other sequels have?
Oh, yeah, totally. This one I would put in the barely watchable camp because there's a couple pretty good scenes in it. There's like a chase scene halfway through where the protagonist, and speaking of later Halloween sequels, this film does the same thing that those films do in making everybody related. And also, speaking of The Force Awakens, right?
Yeah, it does. It pulls the Halloween 2 move where our heroine is actually related to Leatherface.
Right. And there's this whole thing where she inherits this house, and Leatherface lives in the basement of the house. He's been locked away all these years as a, threat to society, and they let him loose. And there's one pretty decent chase scene that takes place at like a roadside carnival midway through that's kind of fun. But just like I think the whole exercise is kind of stupid. It's stupid to be so devoted to something that the creators aren't that devoted to.
Well, and beyond that, if you look at this film, I guess my ultimate point is that, the movie opens with they basically convert footage from the original film into 3D, which is kind of a neat trick. It's very, very weird to see. It was very weird to see on the big screen. This is another one that I covered professionally by going to, I believe I went to a Friday morning screening of this one.
Okay.
But this thing is trying so hard to tell you that it is in the same family, even stylistically, as the original, but it really plays nothing like the original film.
No, not at all. It completely lacks the grittiness. It's very slick.
Yes.
All the characters in it, they have that same kind of look, which is very of the time. I think this film, like, it looked dated to me when I watched it in 2020, and it came out in 2013. But it's just very, very much of that moment, and all the characters have that kind of like, supporting character on a CW teen drama kind of look, where they look a little bit too perfect to be in a Texas Chainsaw movie.
Yeah. Honestly, it's the type of movie. Yes, it's very slick, and honestly, if this movie ended, if its end credits featured a nu metal song, I would not be shocked, to be honest.
Yes.
That's the kind of movie it is.
Yeah, it's that kind of aesthetic. Yeah, only 2013, so, you get back to regular old metal by that point.
That's true. Audiences gave this one a C+. That was its cinema score. I am going to agree with you and say that it's barely watchable. I think you can even do better if you want to watch a Texas Chainsaw sequel, even though a lot of those are pretty bad. So this one is by no means the worst of that crop, but it's I think it's comparable to some of the bad ones they've released over the years.
I think if you want to get out into the wilds of a Texas Chainsaw sequel, C4. Don't bother with this one.
That's the one with McConaughey and Zellweger,
Renee
right?
Zellweger. Yep.
Yeah.
If you want to really get out in the wilds of that series, see part 4. Don't bother with this.
Cool. Okay, so let's move on. The next film is also in a franchise. So a year later, they released another franchise movie. A lot of these actually are sequels and spin-offs and continuations of series that already exist. And this one it was released on January 3rd, 2014, and it's Paranormal Activity: The Marked Ones. Now,
and this is mostly a sequel in name only. They do some kind of convoluted stuff at the end, but mostly it's just one of those. They take an unrelated script and slap Paranormal Activity on it.
Very much so. Which, as somebody who likes the Paranormal Activity films, or at least thinks that there's a certain novelty to them, and a certain sophistication to how they operate formally, I was really bugged by the fact that this thing has none of the hallmarks of it. So I mean, with most of the Paranormal Activity films, the gimmick is that you have this locked camera, basically.
Right.
You have this camera that you set up in the room, and sometimes it's multiple cameras. But the sort of gimmick that all of the films have, other than this one, is this single static shot that the series plays with, that they return to every night, and every night the sort of the ghostly mischief gets a little worse. This thing has nothing comparable. It basically just adopts this standard roving camera of any found footage horror movie. So you're right that it's Paranormal Activity pretty much in name only. The film was developed,
and it's not even a ghost. It's an occult horror movie. It's witchcraft. It's brujeria. It's really not even a ghost story.
That's very true. It was developed as essentially as a spin-off and targeted very specifically at Latinx audiences. It's set in, I believe, in Los Angeles and the
Southern California for sure. I think Oxnard.
Oh yeah,
which
okay.
I'm not sure where Oxnard is, but it's in
near
that
LA
area, I think.
I was actually born in Oxnard.
Oh, no kidding.
Fun fact, yeah. Southern California, and not necessarily in the same place as the other films in the series.
Right.
I think a slightly different town, and the cast is almost entirely Latinx, and for the most part, this thing this could be any generic found footage horror movie, and it actually reminded me a little bit of Chronicle, which had come out a few years earlier.
It is very Chronicle,
yeah, that whole like playing with the powers bit, because one of the kids gets basically this local kid gets possessed. And at first, that becomes like he can do fun demon power stuff.
Yeah, it's basically superpowers. It's just another kind of ingredient they throw in the cauldron here, so to speak.
Totally. This film is directed by Christopher Landon, who people may know for his recent contributions to horror comedy. He made the Happy Death Day films and also last year's Freaky. So I feel like he's really kind of found a different niche for himself. You would find very little. There's very little evidence of that in this film. I guess the movie does kind of have an occasionally comic tone. But
yeah, I would disagree with you there, actually. The thing about this film, for me, honestly, I thought this film was way worse about the why on earth are they filming this question. It was worse than The Devil Inside even, I think. I think this film was, I was just really bugged the whole time. Like, why are you filming this? Why are you filming this? And they don't even bother giving the documentary explanation. You're just supposed to sort of infer that these kids enjoy, like, cameras. But like they don't really go out of their way to explain it why.
Well, it is the YouTube generation, right?
I guess so.
We are looking at kids these days, I say, and immediately turn into a pile of dust. I mean, a lot of younger people these days do film themselves a lot, right?
Yeah, I guess so. But I mean, I don't know. I was kind of bothered by that with this film. It really pushed past the limits of credibility why someone would be filming. However, I didn't hate this one because I found the lead kids kind of, just the scenes of them kind of goofing off. And there's one early on where they filmed themselves doing kind of a jackass stunt down the stairs at their apartment building. I thought that stuff was kind of funny, and I thought the kids were kind of charming. And certainly it's not Landon. He's certainly gotten better at it, but like you can kind of see the seeds of a horror comedy, I wouldn't say auteur, but a horror comedy specialist. You can see the seeds of it in this movie, I think.
Okay, I hear that. It bugged me as a Paranormal Activity fan, but on the other hand, this is the 5th film in that series, and I'm not sure that. I mean, I do think that this is a more generic film than those other ones, but we had already seen 4 of those that do kind of something similar, so maybe it's not such a big deal that it breaks with the tradition of the franchise.
Yeah, they had to get out of the suburbs by this point, I think.
Yeah. I'm going to say this one is barely watchable.
Yeah, I would put this one barely watchable because I was really just, the horror of it just kind of bugged me. I enjoyed the characters and some of the comedy, but yeah, I'd call it barely watchable because the horror just didn't really work for me.
Which, by the way, we should say that we discussed this before recording, and I feel like this is as good a time as any to bring this up, but I'm not sure there is a truly honest, strong scare in this entire run of films.
No. Yeah, that's what was disappointing about this film for me, is because most of the Paranormal Activity movies, even some of the later ones, like I remember 4 has is it 4 where they attach the static camera to like a ceiling fan? And there's a really good scare in that
the third
movie.
one. It's an oscillating fan.
Yeah,
and
there's a real good scare
back
in that
and
movie.
forth. There is. I mean, I actually think that these the Paranormal Activity films do have some pretty big scares if you're able to. I know that some people find those movies like anti-scary in a lot of ways. That kind of primitive, the sort of primitive bump in the night approach that they take does not work for everyone. But
that stuff works on me, so whatever.
Yeah. Okay, so a year later, on January 2nd, 2015, another sequel was released, and that was The Woman in Black 2: Angel of Death. Right. Now, this was the sequel to the 2012 original, which was not a January horror film. I believe it was an early February one. And it's based on a novel by Susan Hill from the 80s. The original was Daniel Radcliffe's first post-Harry Potter role. And it was sort of set in England in the early 20th century, and was about this man who is investigating the death of a bunch of children in a small English village. The material has also been adapted into a long-running stage play. There's a play that they've been doing on stage for a very long time now.
Interesting.
That involves, to my understanding, I've never seen it, but I think it involves a lot of sort of spooky practical effects on stage.
Cool, fun.
Yeah, they like do things with like a rocking chair and stuff.
Ooh, I
found the original film to be a lot of fun. for what it is. And this sequel is in a lot of ways kind of different than that. I mean, it's set, for one thing, it's set a good 40 years or so afterwards in 1941 during World War II. What did you think of this film, Katie?
This film bored me to death. I thought it was so boring. At the beginning, I was kind of excited and heartened because the Hammer Films logo came up. I didn't believe Woman in Black relaunched Hammer Studios, the first one. It brought, and if you're familiar with horror at all, you know all about Hammer, which was a big force in the I'd say the 50s through the 70s in horror films. And I was so tickled to see the logo come back up. I'm glad they're back. But this one was like some of the worst Hammer horror movies from the 60s, where they take like good atmosphere and a promising setup and just completely squander it on a very, very boring movie.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you in the sense that I do think that there's great atmosphere, and I think the setup is actually pretty strong. I mean, the film opens in the tunnels of basically underground London because the Germans it's on one of the days where there's a bombing campaign going on.
During the Blitz, yeah.
Exactly. And so I think that's actually kind of a great setting, and I was struck by there's actually for a January horror film, there's actually a little bit of visual elegance in this one.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah. There's like an opening shot where they're driving to the country and they're taking this group of kids to get them out of London, get them out of the line of fire. They're taking them to this big manor in the country, which I confess I don't know if it's the same one from the original. It's been a few years since I've seen the original. I think it's the same house.
I couldn't remember either.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Probably it's the same ghost, so.
Yeah, it is the same ghost, so it's probably the same house. But they take these kids, and there's just these early shots of like our main character, who's a nurse. She's looking out the window, and she just sees this. She sees like this cross in the fog, and I was struck by some of the imagery in this. I don't disagree that it's pretty boring. I mean, it is like there is not. This is not a scary film, and
no.
But I do say that I did kind of admire its sense of atmosphere, and I thought the acting was solid. And I did like the novelty of the setting a bit. I will say that maybe it's just that most of these films are not set in a world that's particularly interesting, but I think this being set in World War II era England gave it a certain novelty that I enjoyed.
A certain novelty, but I felt like they didn't. It was another area where I felt like they kind of squandered it, in that there being the background of war has this background of dread that I didn't really feel in the rest of the movie. Once they left the city, the war stuff kind of fell to the side, and they didn't really use that really rich thematic through line very much. And I don't know. I mean, yeah, English manor houses are cool, but like the English have an advantage when it comes to ghost movies, because they have a lot of these manor houses to choose from. Yeah. A lot of spooky old houses in England, and like the 40s setting was fairly novel, but the creaky old manor house is as cliche as they get. And I just felt like there was so much potential for atmosphere in this, but it was just a slog. It was just like long slog that I suppose was supposed to be spooky atmosphere, and then like a generic kind of it relied a lot on jump scares, and I thought that the design on the ghosts wasn't very original or interesting, and I don't know, this one just bored me to tears. I would avoid this one personally.
Oh, is this an avoid at all costs for you?
Yeah, I really didn't like it.
Wow.
I thought it was really just a wasted opportunity.
I guess we're breaking here, because I would call this one almost good.
Oh, wow.
I'm going to give this one the almost good.
Wasted opportunity, yeah.
Boring, but not without its pleasures is how I would land with it. I mean, I don't know. I guess I think there are worse things than being boring, but I think there are things to recommend about this film, and it has moments that I liked. And I think you just have to prepare yourself that if you're looking for a trashy January horror film, this isn't it. Like it's not going to deliver the goods. It could use more of the hamminess that enlivened so much of the 70s Hammer fare.
Yes.
Like there's not a hammy performance in this thing, and that's a little disappointing.
Yeah, I just felt like it reminded me of a lot of the filler that Hammer put out back in the day.
Yeah. Okay, so 1 year later, on January 8th, 2016, they released The Forest. Now, this is the movie that is famously about the suicide forest in Japan. There were a couple movies that actually came out. Gus Van Sant made a very bad one. And I would say that this does have the benefit of being better than the Gus Van Sant film, which I believe was called Sea of Leaves. That is a very, very bad film and a very boring one. And that obviously, I think there's a ghost in that too, if I'm not mistaken. But this one is...
that's what the forest is known for, so...
Right, exactly. So before you watched this, did you have familiarity with the suicide forest in Japan?
I've never been to the suicide forest, but I know about the suicide forest. It's at the base of Mount Fuji, and if you have seen this film or you do see this film, know that it is completely wrong about where its reputation comes from. The Aokigahara is the name of the forest, and it's at the base of Mount Fuji, and it's known as being a place, and there are a lot of places like this. You get this out in the desert, too, to where it's really easy to get lost, and you can see things just out in the trees because it's so vast that there's so much sameness that you kind of start to hallucinate if you get lost out there. But it wasn't known as a suicide destination until the late 60s, and that was because there was a very popular novel that was a romance novel where the characters committed suicide together in the forest at the end of the book, and that's when it became the suicide forest. It has nothing to do with yureis or, ancient folk beliefs. I found it borderline racist, the way that they framed, like, the belief in the forest in this movie, particularly knowing that, like, you wouldn't expect the average person to know that there was a popular novel and that's why it's the suicide forest. But even so, even if you didn't know that, it, like, just the way that they,
well, do your damn research, you know? If you're going to make a movie about this, do your fucking research, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I had a lot of beef with this movie in that way. And so, like, even if you didn't know that, I just found that the way that they framed, like, the primitive folk belief and like, they just framed it, I thought it was kind of racist. Honestly.
I agree with you.
And
I mean, it's already dicey enough. I mean, telling this story like from the perspective of
through the medium of white people. Yeah, for sure.
Very much so. Yeah.
Another funny thing about that is there's a character in this film who, he's another white guy who he's supposed to be a magazine journalist, and there's a scene where they're sitting in a bar and he talks to the guy working behind the bar in Japanese, and the main character played by Natalie Dormer, so impressed with his Japanese. I barely speak Japanese. I speak Japanese like a 5-year-old child. I'm not very good at it, and I can tell you that guy was speaking phonetically. He had no idea what he was saying.
I mean, that kind of reflects the general effort level of this film.
Yes, I think that's very emblematic of how much thought and effort they put into this film.
Yeah, there are no scares in this film.
No good ones.
No good ones. The acting is pretty bad. I mean, I like Natalie Dormer well enough, but her character,
she's all right.
She makes no sense in this.
Oh, yeah. The psychic twin thing was a little bit silly, too. I just felt like, okay, so the film is like, a twin, an identical twin, and a magazine reporter go searching for an English teacher in the Aokigahara in Japan. And as a former English teacher in Japan, who is now a journalist, who has twins in my family, all that was wrong. This movie is just full of shit on every single level. But I don't blame Natalie Dormer. Some of this was actually shot in Japan, and I do not blame her for taking a free trip. Like, it is expensive to fly over there. So.
Yeah, well, here's my thing, though. I mean, beyond the fact that this thing is pretty boring on top of all that, and there are no good scares in this. I mean, that's a trend of what the movies we're talking about today, but there are no good scares in this film.
No.
Beyond that, like, how do you shoot in a place that has to be as I mean, we talked about the last film, The Woman in Black 2, as having atmosphere going for it.
Mm-hmm.
This thing is in this forest, and it has no atmosphere to speak of. How do you?
No, it could have been any forest. Like, it could have been any forest anywhere. Like, it was completely. They had a couple kind of drone crane shots above the forest, but mostly it was just utterly generic. Like, it could have been shot the same place they shot, the Adam Wingard Blair Witch, and you wouldn't have been able to tell the difference.
What's the point in going to another place and filming there if you're not going to capture anything distinctive about that place?
Right, exactly. Like, they have some footage of her riding in a cab in Tokyo, and it's the same shot you always see of that one intersection in Tokyo.
Yeah, exactly. I would call this one, I would say avoid this one at all costs.
I'd say avoid this one too. Like, obviously I had some specialized knowledge, which a lot of times when someone watches a movie like this and they have a little bit of specialized knowledge, they find it extremely irritating because it's usually very off base. For that reason, I'd say avoid at all costs, but I'd also say avoid at all costs because it was just like kind of a stupid movie that really relied on a lot of formulaic stuff for the very minimal amount of scares that it did have.
Side note, I will say that my main association with this film, long after I've forgotten any single shot in this film or anything that happens in the plot, I will appreciate that we don't normally do this because it's a little tacky to talk about the swag that we get from various movie productions.
Sure.
But they sent, back in 2016, as a promotional tool, they sent two things attached to this movie that I find so one of them was a backpack that I still have, a very durable backpack that I've been using for like 5 years now.
Points for the forest.
Yeah, exactly. I did not review the forest. It would not have improved my opinion of it, but I do love that backpack. The other thing that they sent, and this is super weird, is they sent one of those little child, I'm struggling to remember what they're called, those little slide readers that you put up, those plastic slide readers that you put up to your eyes, and you kind of click each one, and it rifles through the various slides. Do you know what I'm talking about?
A Viewmaster?
A Viewmaster, yeah.
Yeah, there's a Viewmaster in the movie.
Right. So to promote it, they sent a plastic Viewmaster, and I put the thing up to my eyes, and I'm clicking through, and it's like shots of the forest and shots from the movie. The last slide on this thing is a picture of my face against the backdrop of the forest.
Excuse me?
Isn't that weird?
That's creepier than what they use it for in the movie, which is she's going through the slides and the last one is a ghost. It's a jump scare. Like, that's creepier than what they did in the movie with the thing.
Some intern found a picture of me online and put it on a slide, and they sent it to me. Isn't that bizarre?
That's creepy. I don't like that at all.
Yeah. But I will always remember the forest for those things.
On that same subject, my beloved piece of promotional material for a bad movie is I have a hoodie from the film The Bye Bye Man.
Nice. The Bye Bye Man is even worse than The Forest.
The Bye Bye Man is a very bad movie, and so it's very funny to me to just walk around the house in my Bye Bye Man hoodie.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so the following year, we are back to a late franchise film. It is January 6, 2017 is when this one came out, and it is Underworld Blood Wars. Mm-hmm. Now, this is the fifth and at this point most recent entry in that franchise, which stars Kate Beckinsale as I guess they call her a death dealer. She is a vampire assassin and one of the main warriors in this centuries-long battle between vampires and werewolves, which sounds exciting, but if you're thinking that sounds exciting, you have clearly never seen an Underworld movie.
Okay, so I have a question. This was my first Underworld movie. I'm going to admit that I had never seen an Underworld movie before this, and so I jumped in at the very end. It wasn't that hard to follow, but, I had to kind of let some plot points go. I was like, yeah, sure. I'm sure they explained that in part 3 or whatever. So are there other... Is it just vampires and werewolves in this world, or are there humans too?
Now, going by my own memory, there are humans. In fact, humans show up in one of the entries, and it's almost like a surprise, I feel like.
Okay.
Because I think that these movies imagine a world. We're going to really piss off there's going to be some deep Underworld fan listening to this being like, you're getting these details wrong. But I believe that the idea is that most humans, as these films have started, because I think they're set in the future or something. The weaponry is very futuristic, People are using like UV guns and stuff. I think the idea is that humans have mostly been killed off by these two species. And now it's the two of them battling at this point.
Okay. Well, speaking of futuristic weapons, what really struck me about this film, we talked a little bit earlier about how found footage you see that trend reflected in the early parts of this particular trend. This part of this trend, I was watching this movie, and about halfway through, I was like, oh yeah, Game of Thrones was really popular in 2017. Because this movie, I would describe this movie as The Matrix meets Game of Thrones. You have this very, vinyl catsuit, sort of sexy goth futuristic thing. And then halfway through, they go to a different vampire stronghold that is basically the Wall from Game of Thrones.
Yep, very much so.
And the character design of the vampires there is very much like Daenerys on Game of Thrones with the long white hair.
Yep. And Charles Dance is in it as well.
And Charles Dance is in it! I know!
Yeah. Well, obviously, no Natalie Dormer in this one. She was in The Forest the previous year, but that's probably another Game of Thrones sort of creeping into
absolutely
into this particular trend.
That's why she was in demand at the time.
For sure. I think the Matrix is obviously the first point of reference that I think this series adopted with the first entry, which I think came out in 2003, if I'm not mistaken. These things have been going for a while. So it came out I think right after The Matrix Reloaded, and it was very much oh yeah, they're trying to do The Matrix with vampires. But by the later entries in the series, they were adding more sort of gothic elements, and they were sort of embracing the fact that this, we are talking about vampires and werewolves here, so why not get out of these these generic industrial cityscapes and get into creepy gothic forests and castles and stuff. There's long stretches of this that take place at a castle. These movies are interchangeable and interminable, in my opinion. I kind of liked some of the set dressing. You were talking about the gothic castles. There's one scene in this where they're having a vampire ball, and legit, there were some kind of cool goth fashions at the vampire ball. I kind of liked them. I was like, good for the costume designer. You're having fun with this. But one thing I thought was very ridiculous about these movies, and I don't know if they're all like this, but there's so many vampires just kind of languidly hanging around. It reminded me of that scene in Monty Python and the Holy Grail where he goes to the castle full of virgins and they're all just kind of draped over the side of the wall. It reminded me of that. Yeah, I mean, this follows the Anne Rice model of these sort of aristocratic, lazy vampires, I think, I mean, there are also the badass, skin-tight catsuit vampires played by Kate Beckinsale, but there's also just a lot of vampires who spend their time just talking about
hanging around
and talking palace intrigue. There's a lot of discussions about the vampire court, and I find that so tedious. It's abstractly I find these movies kind of funny because I think that they're almost idiosyncratic in their crappiness, but the practice of actually watching them is so numbing to me. There's so much exposition in these films. For movies about vampires fighting werewolves, god damn, do they hit you with a lot of information.
That's really interesting because that's what I was just letting wash over me, assuming that because it was part 5, yeah, of course I don't understand what the hell's going on.
No, they're all like this. They all have, I mean, even the very first film in the series is already telling you things about this, more information than we really need about a centuries-old war between vampire and werewolves. Just give us the goods. Also, terrible CGI in these films, but...
Very bad CGI, but led to one very hilarious moment towards the end of this film, which, spoiler alert again, Kate Beckinsale rips a dude's spine out at the end of Mortal Kombat. Finish him.
Not just a dude, a werewolf's.
Yes, which made it extra difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I cackled at that. I'd call this one barely watchable because I did enjoy the goth fashion. The inner teenage mall goth in me, I have a little drop of that in my blood, I was a teenager and so were you during the height of Hot Topics, so there's a little bit of that influence creeping in. That part of me enjoyed the look of the film, and I did laugh a lot at the climactic moment, so I would call this one barely watchable.
I do wonder if you were able to enjoy this a little bit more because you have not slogged through other entries in the series.
That's entirely possible because, like I said, I just, kind of just let it wash over me and was like, whatever.
Yeah. I mean, they're all the same. in my opinion. Jesse Hassinger actually did a run the series for us on this film. It's a fairly funny piece, although I think he's way too easy on these films, honestly. But but he describes sort of eventually getting a sense of Stockholm syndrome watching them, though, where he was like, well, I feel like I can, by the end, I can sort of distinguish the good underworlds from the bad ones. And it's all, for me, it's all just like a numbing rush of like skin tight costumes and generic action scenes and characters standing around like talking plot at each other, you know?
Yeah, the plot stuff was, I agree that there was a lot of intrigue and a lot of plot, but, you know, like I said, maybe going in cold's the best way to go with Underworld Blood Horse.
It might be. So I guess I'm going to say avoid at all costs this film, but I will say that with the caveat that if you've never seen an Underworld film, this is as good a place to start as any because they're all the fucking same.
Yeah, and you can have a nice little chuckle being like, remember 2017.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so the next year is another sequel. On January 5th, 2018, Insidious the Last Key came out. Now, this is the fourth film in the Insidious series, which launched a few years earlier. The actual continuity of the series is a little convoluted.
Yeah, they really stretch it in this one, I think.
Yeah, so this is a sequel to the third film, which was itself a prequel. So the third film was a prequel to the original that looked back on a character played by Lynn Shay, who
I love.
I do like her a lot. It's nice to see her get starring roles, you know?
Yes, I agree.
It's sort of cool, at least in an abstract sense, that the Insidious franchise basically became a star franchise for 70-something Lynn Shay. I do quite like that. I
have some affection for it for that reason because I like Lynn Shay specifically, and it really is so different for a franchise to be led by, you know, a woman over the age of 50. Like, that's very rare.
Very, very true. Very true. And this one sort of delves into the character's past. She's like a paranormal investigator, essentially.
Yeah, she's a psychic. She's got the shining, the gift, the touch.
Yep. So we meet her as a child, and she returns to her hometown to investigate a new haunting. Listen, I have not seen every entry in the Insidious series. I think I missed the third. I always thought that Insidious was a little bit of a dry run to The Conjuring, which I think is a much stronger piece of filmmaking.
I would agree with that, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. And it sort of refined what Wan was really interested. Writer-director James Wan, of course, who did not make this film, but did make the first and the second Insidious films. And I found this is very much a fourth entry in the series. Like, this thing really spins its wheels. Like, there is nothing in this film. I did not see the third, so I can't speak to if it's better or worse than the third.
The third one's a little better because it's straightforward. Like, it's a pretty straightforward, like, it has some, it elaborates on the mythology a little bit, but it doesn't push it to the breaking point like this one did. This one, I love the setup. Like I said, I love Lynn Shay, and I love that in this film she has her entourage of virgins, I believe is what I wrote down in my notes. Like,
I hate those guys, though. They're so annoying.
I think they're kind of fun. I kind of like them. And I just feel like you go, Lynn Shay, you have your entourage. You be like spooky girl boss. Like, do your thing, Lynn Shay. And so I like the setup, and I even enjoy her sidekicks. But I just felt like the story on this one was a big fat goose egg. It laid an egg at the beginning and didn't get any better.
Yeah, and I just think that in terms of delivering the goods, it's so generic.
And the big thing with the Insidious movies is the further, which is like the you know, sort of land of the dead, land of the spirits. And in this one, the further had no visual interest to it, which was kind of disappointing.
Right, which is because in the first one, it's actually kind of an interesting place, you know? It's sort of this, as you said, it's this spirit world that they enter, and I feel like all the films eventually get to the further. And this one, it just felt like this thing really felt like checking off. It was like they were obligated to make a fourth film or something, and nobody seemed that into it. Lee Winnell, who James Wan's regular contributor, or collaborator rather, wrote the screenplay. I think he wrote all the films in this series. Watching this thing, I find it really shocking that he went from this to like Upgrade and the Invisible Woman, or sorry, the Invisible Man, the films that he directed after this, because like this thing is so just going through the motions, and those movies are so inventive in a lot of ways.
I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with it being the fourth film in a series. I think that, while Insidious was, did have a good idea and some good characters, it didn't have the real potential to be developed enough. This film, like, it just keeps throwing out different things, like Lin Shaye's character's dad is a serial killer, I guess, was a serial killer, and that's like part of why she is the way she is, and it's very convoluted, and they just keep throwing stuff out there to see what sticks, and none of it really stuck for me.
Yeah.
And it just felt like they were trying to complicate what should be a simple idea, I think.
It should be mentioned that it is directed by Adam Robitel, who was new to the franchise at the time, I believe, and sort of doing an imitation of the Wan style, but not a very good one, in my opinion.
Yeah, this one didn't have any. There was, like, James Wan is excellent at, like, the tension and release jump scares, and this film just really kind of flubbed that too, I think.
No, you can see the wheels moving with this one, where it's the type of thing where it's like there's this set piece that in theory should be great, where she's in this hallway and she's looking into these boxes, and every time she lifts the box up and then turns it down, it's basically like the mirror trick, where you open the cabinet mirror in the bathroom and close it, because it keeps revealing this expanse of empty space. But we've seen variations on that so much, and without Wan's crack timing, and he like knows how to deliver that like a great punchline or something. Without that, we're just watching it and we're just looking at that convention and waiting for the obvious scare. And I felt like that over and over again watching this thing.
Yeah, no, I agree. I would probably avoid this one unless you really, really like Lin Shaye, in which case it's barely watchable. I kind of like vacillated between the two, and I really, really like Lin Shaye.
Yeah, I would go with barely watchable just because nothing in it really offended me. I just thought it was kind of a waste of my time.
Yeah, it spins its wheels pretty bad.
Yeah, but if you like Lin Shaye, you might get something out of it. It is a very prominent role for her.
Yeah, which is great. So
the director, Adam Robitel, actually went on to direct the next film in this little series we're doing here. So 1 year later, after Insidious the Last Key, which, by the way, I should note that though Insidious the Last Key was the lowest rated on CinemaScore of the whole series, it got a B-, it's actually made the most money total of any in the franchise. Like worldwide, it made $167 million. So I think that the director, Robitel, actually was able to secure I think a larger budget for his next film, which again came out on January 4th, 2019, and that is Escape Room.
Yes, Escape Room. This was the one that had a critic screening down.
Oh, well, that makes sense, because I'll just come out and say I think this is the best of the January horror movies, and this is the one I enjoyed the most.
Yay, me too. I would call this one almost good.
This is almost good. I think this one's almost good.
Yeah. It's an original concept, which is great, which helps. I'd say original concept with a grain of salt, in the sense
that's a little
loose
there. I mean, it's basically Cube or Saw or something. But...
Yeah, it's not a sequel. We'll give it that.
True. Yep.
So the basic concept is like you said, Saw. The setup is very Saw, to where 6 strangers get these mysterious invitations to go to this escape room and try out this escape room. And then it turns out all the escape rooms are rigged and people can die because the stakes are real. That's the basic setup for the film. And from there on, it's pretty much a series of set pieces, which, like you said, are very much like Cube, to where each room has its own little diabolical twist to it.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and you sort of, like a normal non-deadly escape room, it's your job to sort of figure out how to progress by looking at clues in the room. I thought this was a poorly written film in a lot of respects. There's a lot of groaners in the dialogue,
for sure,
and it's if you stop and think about this movie for even 2 seconds, it completely falls apart. I mean, even the idea that they could, like, the notion that they could stage this room in a building in the middle of a city is just. Or the series of rooms is totally insane and does not hold up to a ton of scrutiny.
there's anything that's Saw based, that involves a torture chamber inside an anonymous warehouse. Like, they all stretch credulity a little bit.
Very much so. Very much so. But I will say about this one, I watched this last night, the night before recording, and I watched 4 movies last night to prepare for this podcast, and this was the one that kept me the most engaged, the one where I was pretty much just like with it the whole way through. I never felt bored with it. Part of that is I think that the actors are solid. Even though they're delivering wretched dialogue for the most part, I think that they're all pretty good.
Yeah, there's some absurd twists in this movie. There's obviously a moralistic element as to why all these particular people have been called to this place, and some of the quote unquote sins that they're being asked to atone for in these deadly escape rooms are absolutely ridiculous.
Yes. But some of the set pieces are pretty fun, actually. I mean,
some of them are pretty cool.
I really like the one that's in the room that's I guess you could call it the pool hall. And I thought that was clever in construction, the way that they put that one together. I mean, I think that just the whole idea of being stuck in these elaborate death traps is fundamentally exciting in a way that a lot of these kind of pokey ghost stories that we've otherwise been talking about, it just is fundamentally more gripping than that.
Yeah, it has that sort of mousetrap element of the waiting for if you grab the cheese, the trap will fall kind of stuff.
Right.
Yeah, it has that kind of element to it, which does inherently give it some kind of tension. And I actually enjoyed, she's a fairly young actress, hasn't done a lot, but the lead character in this is played by Taylor Russell, the final girl in this film. I thought she did a good job, and it's a rare example of a black final girl in a horror movie,
true.
which is pretty cool.
Yeah, very true. I do think it could have benefited from being rated R, to be honest. The fact that it's PG-13, I mean, I think that we could have gotten maybe some gnarlier deaths. Honestly.
Yeah, that's true. You could have. Yeah, a lot of it is just people kind of disappearing into the nothingness because it is PG-13. There's not a lot more.
Yeah. Because, I mean, you watch something like Cube, and part of the appeal is that you're going to see some really fucking gnarly death scenes.
Right, yeah. You don't have that here, yeah.
No, it doesn't exist here. But I had a fun time with this. Cinema Score gave it a B. Which is, I guarantee, it's definitely the highest that any of these films have scored, and I think that's apropos because I do think it's the best of the lot. I would go as far as saying that it is almost good.
Yeah, I would say almost good with this one too. Especially when you look at it next to all these other films, it's clever and it has compelling characters, which is more than you can say for a lot of these kind of January dump horror films.
Very true. There. By the way, there is a sequel slated to come out. It was had this been a normal year, it's actually possible that it would have occupied that first week of January release slot there, and
maybe next year, huh?
Maybe next year, yeah. So moving on to January 3rd, 2020, which is about a year ago, actually. To the film that released that day, and that is another franchise film, the last film in our journey of crap, and that is the most recent reboot of The Grudge.
Right, and this one is notable for being done by Nicholas Pesky, who's a director that you and I both like a lot. He did The Eyes of My Mother, a film we both liked, and he did Piercing, which, maybe wasn't quite as good as Eyes of My Mother, but it was, an interesting and distinctive exercise. But this one is just, it kind of takes everything that you've seen in previous reboots of The Grudge and puts Pesky's kind of grim, macabre kind of veneer on it. But because the film doesn't really have that kind of edgy quality that Pesky's other films have to it. It just comes off as sort of, I can't believe I'm saying macabre in a bad way, but it kind of is.
I would use the word dour.
Yeah, dour. Yeah,
I think this is a very dour film. Yeah, I mean, which is not necessarily a bad thing in a horror movie, but the thing about this one is that, like most entries in the Grudge series, and the Grudge series, we should say, started in Japan. Obviously, the first film was called Ju-on, and since then we've seen there was an American reboot in 2004, or American remake, sorry, in 2004, and this film actually takes place in that continuity, which is a bit of a surprise. People assumed it was a reboot, but it's actually another entry in the series. So there's it's the fourth of the American Grudge films. And like most of those, it has a kind of it's achronological. It jumps back and forth in time, and there's a slightly novelistic quality to that. In the case of this film, I just kind of felt like. You think it's generous? You know, I mean, we're like seeing different stories and it's jumping around, and I could see that this thing has at least a little bit of ambition going for it. And
it's got a director with a distinctive style. You know, he's not a workman director like Adam Robitel.
Right, exactly. and it's got a pretty good cast too, honestly.
Yes, two of my favorites. It's got Lynn Shay and Andrea Riseborough, and I'm a fan of Andrea Riseborough as well.
Lynn Shay, our January queen.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, but the problem is that with all these components, it's still, I don't know, it adds up to kind of a big nothing in the end.
Yeah, when I reviewed this movie, my big thought was that this was this is one of those movies that is kind of at odds with itself, to where you kind of have this you can kind of see the forces of the director versus the studio kind of wrestling with each other in this film. And the result is that you just get something that's just kind of mushy and just really no fun. And this is another one. I believe this was also an F Cinema score.
It was.
Grudge. And I believe that is also for its ending. I believe this is another
you
one
think
of those.
So?
Yeah, because when this was one I saw on Thursday night, first Thursday night show, and people audibly yelled at the screen at the ending. They were like, boo! People were like booing and hissing at the screen when it was over.
People really hate like irresolution in a lot of ways.
Yeah, they really do.
Or a hasty one. I mean, it's not a good ending, but I would argue that most of this film is not especially good.
No, yeah, I just feel like this is like another film that came out in January last year. Like, if you put this one next to Gretel and Hansel, like I feel like Gretel and Hansel worked within the constraints of a studio filmmaking so much better than this one does.
100%. I mean, that one I think really preserves Perkins' vision. This one just felt like the only thing that really carried over from something like The Eyes of My Mother is that it's a grim piece of work.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, I agree. That's the auteur signature on this film, is that it's very grim.
Very much so. I will say that the cast also includes Damien Bashir, Betty Gilpin, Jackie Weaver, William Sadler. It's a really good cast. It's a shame to see them wasted so much. Oh, John Cho is in it as well.
Yep.
It's a good cast, and they're kind of stranded. And I also felt like this thing's scares are so perfunctory. It's like it's actually barely interested in that element. And there's a perverse part of me that sort of admires that, but there's another part of me that's like, you can't make a Grudge movie and not give people the goods, you know?
Right. Well, again, I mean, I'm obviously putting my own interpretation on top of this. I'm projecting a little bit, but I kind of see that as sort of part of the whole, like the internal power struggle that's so obvious on the screen. It almost seems like a fuck you to the studio, being like, I'm not even going to make this thing scary. Fuck you.
Yeah, I like that. I would ultimately go with barely watchable for this one.
Yeah, this one's barely watchable. If you like that director's style, there is a little bit of it in the film, but don't set your expectations too high.
So that's it, basically, for this particular trend. We'll see if it continues next year. We don't know where we're going to be as a movie culture in a year from now. I hope that movie theaters are open again. I will say that most of these movies are not good, but with the way things are right now, I would go for a bad horror movie if I could go see it. In
100%. I absolutely would. I would go to a Friday morning screening and sit in the theater with one other person, as often happens when you go to see a film that isn't screened for critics. It's you and one person at the matinee on Friday morning. Like I said, I kind of enjoy this tradition, and I did get to review probably the best one out of the batch with Escape Room, and maybe that gave me a little bit of a more of a sunnier outlook on the whole thing. And the fact that escape room's really not that bad.
Yeah.
Well, like you said, as a movie-going culture, we'll see where we're at next year, but I'm gonna, have a little bit of optimism towards the future and say Escape Room 2, January 2022. Let's make it happen.
See you there.
See you there. That's all we've got for you today. Please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to Film Club wherever you get your podcasts.
This week's episode of Film Club was hosted by me, Alex Dowd, and by Katie Reif. It was produced and edited by Carl Blomberg. Our sound mixer and finishing editor is Seth Hafer, and our motion graphics designer is Julie Mullins. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode. We're going to be talking about spoilers. So join us then.
Spoiler alert.
Thanks.
Bye.